So I'm joined today on Building Safety Faces by Juliet Morris, who is a leaseholder in the Manchester area, but at the moment is very wisely hiding out in Australia, getting some weather and getting away from the cladding scandal. So Juliet, welcome to Building Safety Faces.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
No problem. So what would be really good, Juliet, is if you could talk us through, maybe just to sort of introduce your situation and how you've come into this and how long you've been involved in the whole building safety and cladding scandal crisis.
Okay, I bought my lease in 2017, no, 2016, sorry, and didn't know anything till I think 2018 when it all started to come our way. And felt very lonely and very isolated. So I set up a chat group within my block. Luckily, I'm quite a nosy person, and at the AGMs, I'd taken people's names and details. So it was a little bit easier than it would normally have been, and have people on side. But I quickly realised that we needed to go beyond that. So I had to learn how to set up a Twitter account and so on. So I did that. And found it so much more helpful because I'd got experience from other people that I would never have had if I'd stayed within that small group.
Fantastic.
I found it very useful.
And talk us through your block. So how many flats are there and how many stories in the block, and where are you with remediation and all those sorts of things? What's happening right now?
So we've got 191 flats in the block, and we've got a residence management company that I think has saved us from a lot of hassle. Whilst we don't know anything, we're given very little information. I think perhaps they're protecting us, so we haven't had a figure yet. We have 6% cladding, so that's not very much. The majority of our problems, 94%, are building issues. So we've got compartmentation issues, we've got cavity barriers, we've got a couple of different issues with the windows, the window heads and something else. We've got those sort of issues going on. And I've been very worried about how much it's going to be. The only figure we've been given so far is it'll be between 30 and 35k for remediation. But I've looked at other people in a similar situation, and quite often the costs have been higher. Although on the last chat we had with our managing agent, Urban Bubble, they're still sticking to this 30 to 35, which I don't think we should be paying at all, but at least it's not in the 80s and 90s figure. So really the answer to your question is we don't know anything at the moment. We know what the problems are. We don't know how they're going to be addressed or when they're going to be addressed. So
do you have a waking watch at the moment, or have you managed to?
Well, no, we had one, and that lasted, I can't remember off the top of my head, potentially 6 months. But this was back in 2018, and this is where I think our residence management company directors were really proactive. And within 6 months, we had the alarm system in, the new heat sensors, and luckily we were able to get rid of the waking watch. So that was, I think, 18.5k a month, and at the time I thought that was outrageous. Now looking at other people, I realise again, we were very lucky, we were very protected. And our alarm system was approximately 100k. And again, looking at other people, whilst I was cross at the time, I'm now realising, again, we were very protected and we were very lucky. So that we've got the system in, we've got rid of the waking watch, and all we need now is the information on how to move forward. And I think that's waiting on information from the Building Safety Fund, whether or not our application has been accepted. So I think that's where we're up to.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's very pertinent having this conversation this morning, where the news broke over the weekend around the gagging clauses that the RMC directors would have signed up to as a part of the bill. So it's interesting to know whether that might impact the amount of information that you can be given. For example, we need to see how that will fold out, or unfold.
Absolutely, yes, I agree. I've been a bit horrified by that myself, and from what I'm reading on Twitter, it seems that people are being given much less than they'd asked for, a fraction of what they'd asked for. Well, is it worth signing your life away for a fraction? If you're going to have this massive debt anyway, don't comply.
Yeah, and it's been painted this morning by Lord Greenhouse as a quite normal in a commercial agreement. So the question now is who's selling what to who.
Absolutely, yes. It's not a commercial situation. Yes, exactly.
Well,
and it's more of gagging us, isn't it?
That's my interpretation of it, that it's gagging, because I think
Yes.
normally in a commercial agreement there's an element of balance on both sides. So at the moment, that clause, the gagging clause, only gives the power to the Ministry of Housing to gag the applicant. But there's nothing to say that the Ministry of Housing can't talk about the applicant, because it's not a two-way clause. So putting aside the gagging part of it, it's not normally in a non-disclosure agreement or a confidentiality agreement. It works both ways in terms of disclosure of information. And if one side wants to talk about the other, they need to approve that discussion. Whereas
absolutely,
here,
yes,
it's entirely one-way traffic, which, yeah, I sort of described it over the weekend as a sort of a take it or leave it clause. It's sort of, if you want any money, you accept our conditions. It's not a negotiation. It's not a standard commercial conversation.
yes.
So yeah, it's a bullying tactic, really, I think, is my interpretation of it.
Well, I've been thinking about this since it all broke, and I've got my own little airy-fairy idea. And it's to do with the fact that we're told that the loans are going to be a specific amount. Say, for example, you're told it's going to be 30k. And then you're told it's going to be put on the block. So the freeholder will own the loan, and then we'll apportion it out through the managing agents. And it's going to take over 30 years. But in a different venue, Michael Wade has said these costs are going to go up. I think it was the Birmingham Summit, the Birmingham CAG, I can't remember, but it was in Birmingham. And it came up that the costs would go up and they would be put onto the buildings. So if my starting point is 30k, which I'm under the impression is the end point, but actually no, it's the starting point. And then something like insulation might come in, because that's not been looked at yet. And it's, in my opinion, going to happen. The regs are going to look at it and say, well, that's not safe now. Costs are going to go up for various things. New things will be found when remediation happens. Michael Wade told us that. So then our costs will go from that 30, that imaginary 30, to potentially 50. I don't know, I'm making these figures up. So then your affordable loan for 30 years becomes unaffordable. So it can't be 30 years anymore. So your affordable loan is now 50 years. But you were gagged, so you now can't tell anyone. So your loan is going to go up. The length of time for the debt's going to go up. I'll be dead when it's all finished. And we can't talk to anybody about it. So really, I'm very cross.
Yeah. And I think you hit on a good point there about affordability, because, that is, regardless of the rights or wrongs of forcing loans onto leaseholders, affordability is a technical term.
Yes.
And a process needs to be gone through on each individual loan applicant to determine the affordability. Now, if you just blanket place that to a loan with a leaseholder and effectively assume affordability for all of the leaseholders that will pay through the service charge. I've asked over the weekend, well, not just over the weekend, but repeatedly for weeks now, for the Financial Conduct Authority to weigh into this discussion, to say, please, can they demonstrate how that affordability criteria will be managed? Because these are loans, they're not grants. Everybody's talking about a loan. And as far as I'm concerned, if you are recovering payments for a loan through a service charge, it's still a loan. And we have financial regulations around the provision of loans. That's why the credit card lenders have effectively, not the credit card lenders, the payday loan lenders have effectively been closed down. We have this system of regulation. So what is the UK financial conduct regulator doing about this discussion? Have they been consulted? Are they complicit? Do they know nothing about this? Find that hard to believe. So there is huge consumer detriment going on here at play. We're not treating customers fair. I mean, they've got to intervene.
Absolutely agree with every single thing you're saying. And again, I've thought about this, and I've thought that if I go out to take a loan, I'm not going to get one. My finances aren't in shape for me to get a loan. and it's looking like a loan can be imposed on me. Well, as you say, there's no regulation to help me. But then, having said that, there's been no regulation to help the leaseholders. What's happening should be illegal, and it's not. So it's just another thing there's no regulation for, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you at the moment, from a leaseholder's perspective, you have very little right of reply over a service charge anyway, or very little scrutiny over that. You have effectively, you're a forced purchaser of insurance products because, again, someone else will negotiate that for you and tell you how much it costs. So there's no element of choice there. I mean, you understand you need to insure a block in one go, but in certain blocks, you know, there's lots of abuse going on over commissions there and how fair that market is. And then if you throw a loan on top of that, you know, at the moment, if you have a mortgage, traditionally, you could move that mortgage around a regulated, fairly competitive marketplace. So you can't now because everyone's stuck due to EWS1 issues and they're stuck with their lenders, which is another issue. But I don't see with this forced loan. I mean, it's if somebody dictates the interest rate and then effectively says, you know, we won't take account of the affordability for you as an individual. And by the way, if you don't pay this, we'll take your house away from you or your home away from you through forfeiture. I don't understand what mechanism the Financial Conduct Authority could dream up to state that that's fair. And their job is to maintain sort of fairness and customer protection in the financial services market. So are they doing their job? That's the question. It would be amazing, and especially if somebody from the FCA was to listen to this interview, it would be wonderful if somebody from that organisation could step forward and have a chat with us, the groups, me, whoever, or even put out a statement to explain whether this is a viable option or not. Because I think if it's not, it needs to be stopped immediately because it's causing so much stress, and we need to take this as an option off the table.
Absolutely, fully agree with you. Yes, it needs to come off the table. You've got people with student loans, you've got people with loans for the cars, you've got people who've taken on a mortgage, and they've managed that, they've budgeted for it, they know their finances and they're fine. So for somebody else to arbitrarily come along and say, we're going to put this on top and you're also going to owe this, you're right, somebody from the FCA needs to look at it and see what's happening.
So when you bought your flat in, you know, fairly recent history, how well do you think leasehold and service charges was explained to you through that purchase process? I mean, did you?
I don't.
Right. Okay. So talk me through how it happened and where you were before.
Yeah, I was in a house before, and it was quite a large house. And then the roof needed doing and the walls needed doing, and it was all too much for me. And it was in suburbia, and I thought, I need a little flat, just a little place that I can manage, and somebody else will worry about the roof, somebody else will worry about the walls. The service charge was minimal, it was brilliant, it was only about £80 a month. And for them to take that weight off me for that money, it was a good deal. So it was at a time when things were selling immediately. So you had to make a very quick decision. And I made a decision the first day I saw the flat. And going through the process, I knew it was leasehold. And apart from that, I didn't have anything explained to me by anybody professional. Nobody explained that this sort of thing could happen to me, or I'd have run away, never mind walked away. So I just thought leasehold was another form of home ownership, and now I find out I'm a tenant, so that was a nasty shock. And I've always owned my home before, so if I wanted to sell it, I could. If I wanted to put a nail in the wall, I could. If I wanted to put a tap on the outside wall, I could. And it's been a massive shock for me to find out I have no rights, and I signed them away. I can't believe that I was allowed to sign away my freedom. And I'm not putting blame on anybody in particular or any bodies in particular, just the system as a whole we'll talk about. It allowed me to sign away my freedom to the point where now I have no control at all. That's outrageous that happened, and I didn't see it coming, and I didn't know it was happening.
And I think, you know, you're not alone in that. I think why it's very easy with benefit of hindsight to say, well, you shouldn't have done it, or you should have thought about it more, or
Yes.
you should have read the contract more. But the reality is, leasehold and flats are a huge part of the property market. People starting
Yes.
out tend to go through that route, especially in cities, and towards the end of their lives as well, they go into whether it's retirement homes or smaller flat, downsize and release some equity. And I think, to my mind, there should be the trust in the system, that there's fairness to it. It's not so lopsided and one-sided. And I think that's what really rankled me about reading Lord Greenhalgh's response this morning about the gagging clause, as though that is an entire reflection, I think, in one tweet of why we're in this situation now from a legal perspective, because you just think that's normal, and you can't.
Yeah, he does, yes.
It's a distorted, perverse view of the world, I think, which I don't understand, and it just seems so unfair that ordinary consumers, because I think even if I've talked to a lot of people that have said, yeah, I sort of understood the service charge mechanism and what that could mean, but in my mind, and when I was talking to my solicitor, we talked about things like, if the gutters need to be cleared out, or there's the lift might need to be replaced after 10 or 15 years, and we put a sink fund in place to pay for these big capital. Nobody went into this thinking that the service charge was going to be the mechanism for ripping the outside walls off the building at unknown cost, replacing everything because it's dangerous. Or rebuilding, replacing lots of fire doors ahead of, when they're 2 or 3 years old, because they weren't fitted properly by the original builder. Those sorts of things. I don't think that ever really, although legally charging you guys for this, it's the right legal course, because that's what the lease says. The intent I don't think was ever for that. And I think
I think the intent was for maintenance rather than defects, let's say, from the time of build. I don't think it was ever intended for that, but the wording is, the catch-all, and we got caught.
Yeah, those defects, when you look at them, when you look at the Defective Premises Act, and you look at it, that 6-year cut-off, for lodging a claim under the Defective Premises Act. I think that needs to be looked at. That is just, maybe they can't do anything retrospectively, but certainly going forward, I think if the bodywork on your car has a longer guarantee or warranty than an entire building, I think we've got something massively wrong.
Yeah, we have. I absolutely agree. And maybe it could be moved in an ideal world to the identification of the problem, and then maybe 6 years from that, because we had no way of knowing this was going to happen. And actually, we're finding that a lot of people who are within that 6-year period are still not covered. And my heart goes out to those people, the people who the NHBC is not covering, the people who this situation is still ongoing, and they're only 3 or 4 years old. My heart goes out to them even more than myself, because they have a legitimate expectation that the insurance will step in, and it's just not in every case.
Well, it may be that there is a legal mechanism for getting to the point where it will, but the question is, how much money do you throw on top of the liability that you've already got? So if you don't win and you've spent another £20,000, you're now out of pocket to the tune of 50,000 rather than 30. So and I think the larger organisations know that and will make that calculation and say, well, actually, we can defend the claims. It's worth defending the claims because they're so big. People will probably cave or fold because they won't have the financial resources to do it. They won't have the risk appetite to chase through the courts. So, and this is a part to me of the reason why the financial solution has to be brought forward by the taxpayer to say, okay, Juliet, we're going to fix your block. We're going to make it safe. And then we're going to talk about finding who's liable for the costs, and and ultimately maybe some of that will be a cost recovery from residents because there's nobody else to blame, for example. But it's done in a way that it isn't a loan structure. It may be some enhanced tax. My personal feeling is, if we need to raise taxation to pay this bill, it's a taxation that should be raised against everybody, not just the victims of the the crisis. So we need to divide this across society, and even if it was a £1 a month on your council tax for everybody to make buildings safe, maybe that's what we need to, I don't know the mechanism, but
I haven't considered that, and I think it's a wonderful idea. That's a new concept to me, and I'm sitting here thinking, what a great idea.
Well, it's something that could be borne by the many, because we're all impacted by it in some way. That the fact that I'm not personally caught up in this is more by luck than judgment, because as like you, I have a freehold house. I didn't decide to buy a leasehold apartment, so but I could have done, in which case I'd be in your shoes now, and that's the inherent unfair. And my view is that the regulatory ecosystem, if you like, that allowed all of this to happen and allowed us to put plastic foam on the buildings and facades that are combustible and poor building regulations, etc. That ecosystem in this country was created and allowed to perpetuate by multiple governments.
Absolutely.
You and I put those governments in power. They are funded by our taxes, and if we need to, if the governments we have put in place have allowed this to happen and effectively made mistakes, then we as taxpayers have to fix those problems. We don't penalise people. It's very simple. Fixing it isn't simple, but where the cost should fall is very simple. And I think then underneath all of that, we say, okay, taxpayer indemnifies the victims, maybe even compensates the victims on top. And then where possible, the government on behalf of the taxpayer recovers as much of that cash as they can from insurers, from construction companies, from product manufacturers, etc., that happens downstream. And that is, and I think that's the model most people are leaning towards, and it just seems to be an immovable object at the moment with the government, that for whatever reason they don't seem to want to go there.
I know, and that puzzles me. It really does. I listen to all the theories about corruption and so on, and I don't want to believe those. I want to believe we've got an honest and supportive government, but I don't understand why they won't help. I really don't get what's going on. It seems common sense that you can't leave people like us in flammable buildings for a night. One night's too much. And I'm told it might take 10 years. And I'm told I have to be patient. I'm not. And then I've listened to the language like Chris Pincher's come out with. What did he say instead of patient? He said, it's going to happen in good time. Oh, my life is at risk now. Every night, my poor neighbour, a beautiful young woman's got a baby, a brand new baby, and she has to be patient, and in good time, her home will be made safe with her gorgeous little baby. There seems to be a disconnect between reality and what they're doing and saying, to be honest.
I think the post-Grenfell, a number of statements were made, obviously, in Parliament around this. Well, we won't let this happen again. It's outrageous, and all of that sort of outrage that poured out at the time. And I think that set us on a course of condemn everything, take no risk, zero harm, etc., that has created its own momentum, and it's this perpetual belief that everything's going to burn down in 5 minutes. The reality is somewhat less. Overall, I don't think it's as bad as that. In certain circumstances, there are buildings, I think, that are exceptionally dangerous, where people are living in them that probably don't even know that they're dangerous yet. So we've seen that.
I agree.
And I think you've got a whole lot of buildings that, okay, they could be better, but on that sort of spectrum of risk are okay. But if you add in a good fire alarm system and you can get people out of the building, then actually, they're, from a life perspective, they're fairly low risk. From a losing the property perspective, yes, if I'm an insurer that's got to pay to rebuild it, I'd probably be quite worried, because if that goes up, I'm going to lose the whole building. I'm not just going to lose a couple of flats. I'm going to lose the whole thing. So I get a big claim. So I can understand the insurer's view. But I think we've got to the point now where you're right, people are genuinely in fear for their lives of where they live, and they're trying to escape. And I think of lots of people that have just found a way to move out and leave their flats empty. They haven't let them to a tenant, they've just moved out. Well,
you're talking, case in point.
Yeah.
I came to my daughter's in Australia because of the nightmare of it all and the stress of it all, and I'm avoiding coming back. I'm doing everything I can not to come back until it's resolved. It's just too frightening.
Yeah.
And I think, again, I'm one of the lucky ones that can do that.
Yeah, and of course. Sorry, I was going to say. So we've got to the point. So you understand. So you're genuinely fearful of what's going on. So you've got the safety fear. You've got the financial fear and uncertainty, and then I think you've got for a lot of people, you've got that sort of feeling of being trapped in the sense that I almost can't even give it away.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, I've done the figures on mine, but just going back to the feeling unsafe one, it doesn't help that we've got Kingspan. I don't know for a fact it's Kingspan 15, but it's Kingspan, and we were built in 2003, so more than likely it is. So, all these little things that you hear contribute to your feeling of being unsafe. I'm sorry, what did you say? I've forgotten.
So talking about the feeling of being trapped as well, that you can't even give the property away.
Yeah, absolutely. I did my figures. So I know what my flat was worth before. It's now devalued. When I look on things like Zoopla, it's significantly less than it was. I'm ignoring the fact that they say it's worthless at the moment. I'm just looking on Zoopla. And then because I'm top floor, I'm devalued because of build up, not out. I forget the name of it. Protective rights. Anyway, build up, not out. So
right. So you're talking about permitted development of 2 floors.
Thank you. That's what I was trying to think of. Permitted development. Thank you. So they can come and put it's either 2 or 3 floors on top of me. That's certainly devalued everybody who has top floors. I think it's devalued the whole block, to be honest, because we don't know about the footings and we don't know about the impact on the rest of the block. So it will be a problem. So it's worth less. I'm personally devalued because of the extra floors. Then I can take off the amount that potentially I'm going to owe, and I think it will grow. Say mine's 30 to 35. It's not going to end up at 35. It's going to grow exponentially as they find the new things. So I look at that, and then I look at the stress it's causing me. And although my flat is paid for, and I'm lucky that I've got the lifetime behind me, that I could buy a flat outright, I am honestly considering it's better just to walk away. And that's somebody who's paid for. So all those millions of people who've got mortgages, if I'm feeling like this, there must be millions more who've got negative equity or only got 10,000 or something. They're going to feel like I do, that let's just walk away.
Yeah, and it's just heartbreaking. You think, how could this system be allowed to come about, to where we've got to that point now, where you look at these wonderful, beautiful apartment buildings and think these are effectively toxic assets. Well, I use the term assets loosely, liabilities as opposed to assets.
Liability, yes.
How have we created that? Because it's such a fundamental part of our stock. If you look at the Manchesters and the Leeds and the Londons and the big cities, and you look at the high-rise developments and just think probably all of these have got, well, undoubtedly all of them have got problems at minimum, needing an EWS 1 to have any value. They've got the building safety charge on the way if they're over
absolutely over
18 metres. So they've got that sort of potential unlimited charging mechanism, and you sort of you do ask yourself the question, well, who would buy one?
Well, nobody would, and that's why it's probably best for a lot of us to just walk away. Personally, I can do the big stuff like that, and I can cope with it. It's the little stuff that gets on my nerves, but I can walk away, and I'll go and rent a flat somewhere, and I'll have a happy life, and I'll be done with all this. So when they're telling me it's going to take 10 years to sort out, I'm not sitting here for 10 years. you need to get a wriggle on. And I know people will say I'm letting them win, but I'm a pensioner. I haven't got all that time to mess about.
Yeah.
And the time I have got, I want to enjoy it. I don't want to feel trapped and somebody's controlling my life. I want to be free.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think one of the things that I'm sort of looking at, and sort of we're not really having the debate on at the moment, is that there's this sort of building X has got these problems. The solution is rip it all off and replace it. I think, as you've identified, even if we were to find Lord Greenhouse's magic money tree that he says doesn't exist,
Yes,
and throw as much money as we could at this problem, buildings will still have to wait to be remediated. There just aren't enough scaffold tubes or insulation boards or designers or surveyors
scaffolding,
or trades, right?
Yes.
So there will be a queue to do this. So some people will have to live in a building that they've been told is dangerous for the next God knows how many years before they get their work done. So we've got to find a way, I think, of living with the condition and getting to a point where actually we understand what the risk is. We've explained it to everybody. People have reconciled that in their own heads. We've got additional measures in place to keep everybody safe. I'm not generally thinking here about, people in yellow jackets walking around with an air horn. I'm talking about technology and detection systems and suppression systems and things like that can be installed quite quickly. That people think, well, I live with it. We drive older cars that maybe don't have airbags, but we understand that they're not as good in a crash as a newer car. But we kind of understand the risk better.
Yes.
And I think that's a key point that's missing from the conversation at the moment, because it's this binary rip it off and start again, throw it in the skip, do it again with different materials kind of cycle that we're in.
Yeah. I do agree with you, and I've been reading about this. My personal view is I think sprinklers would help. I know it's not going to be necessarily very easy for multiple reasons, but I do think that something like sprinklers would make people feel a lot safer. But that's not coming under the Building Safety Fund, and it's not talked about an awful lot. But my view is we'd feel safer with them.
Yeah, and it could well become, if we look at the building safety bill for taller buildings, and we look at the building safety case that has to be created by the accountable person. So let's just call them the landlord for the moment, for the terms of it. So their job then is to put forward to the regulator a report that says this is how we manage fire and structural integrity. We understand the risk and we manage those risks in this building. So if they then decide that the right thing to do in your building is to put a fire suppression sprinkler system in, and that's going to cost £3,000 per flat, in theory, they could just effectively enforce that on you and charge you within 28 days through the building safety charge, the way it's written at the moment. So it's very much risk-based rather than rules-based. So rather than turning around and saying, look, all buildings over a certain height must have sprinklers by this date in the future, it's very much a subjective view. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I think understanding the data and saying, how do we preserve life safety in this building, number one. And once we've done that, can we also preserve the building as well? So can we stop losing the whole facade, for example, if we get another Grenfell fire? But it may be that the cost of doing this is too expensive, but ultimately, if you know that you're in a safe building from a life perspective, there's means of getting you out. You're going to detect the fire quickly. You're going to suppress the fire. We're going to get you out of the building in one piece. And that works like a well-oiled machine. Then actually you've reduced the risk component of the external wall to a manageable level in terms of keeping people alive. So I think we've got to be a lot more creative about how we put these solutions together, how we explain that to residents, and how we all play a part in keeping each other safe, and we get the market moving again, because at the moment we've just got surveyors going around saying condemned.
Absolutely.
£5 million project, £10 million, £8 million, but without thinking through who's actually going to do these projects. And we've already seen and getting stories in already from residents where a project that might have been 3 million is now coming in at 6 because reality is landing. And if your 30,000 is based on that 3 million, initial
Yeah.
estimate, and then when you actually get to the point where you're letting a contract to a contractor and they've said, well, materials have gone up, labour's gone up, and
absolutely
gone up, you're actually sorry, and we're seeing that landing already, where we're coming in at 50 to 100% more than the original estimate.
Yes, we've seen that. Yes, absolutely. In our particular case, at the beginning in 2018, when we heard about this, we didn't know if the block could be saved because we've got unprotected steelwork as well as these other issues going on. So there was a question that it's not cost effective to remediate the building. That's never been taken away. We still have that worry and fear, but it's never been talked about again. So we sort of assume it's okay now. But going back to the coming up with alternative methods, we need an alternative method. We can't really go down to the steel frame and start again because it's not going to be cost effective.
Well, so,
if we could have an...
So this is a good point.
Sorry.
So your building is an HRB, is it? High-rise building is so.
Yeah. In some places we're 7 floors, and in some places we're 9 floors.
Right. Okay. Well, you so you'll fall under the new regulatory regime. So your accountable person will need to satisfy the regulator that your building is safe, both from a fire perspective, but also a structural integrity perspective.
Yes.
So that would mean understanding how that steel frame is going to perform. Now, a steel frame will probably not perform as it should if it is subject to a heavy fire load. So if that steel frame isn't protected, I think it'd be a lot more difficult for them to justify structural integrity in the building. So therefore, they do need to be looking at that and saying, right, what are we going to do to manage that risk? Now, that's not to say, and I don't know because it's not my specialism, but if that risk could be managed through a fire suppression system, then great. If it can't, that, you know, and you do need to look at all of these things in the round and say, is this risk level tolerable? But that conversation needs to be ongoing, because there's a real concern here that these remediation projects are going around, and we've already seen this from immediate remediations after Grenfell, where they've effectively solved one problem but created a new one because they're now not compliant with whatever they replaced the original cladding system with. There's problems, and you mentioned
absolutely, yes. I'm terming this the second and third waves. Second and third waves of issues being identified, second and third waves of costs. That's how I'm viewing this.
We're seeing it in Green Quarter, Manchester, for example, at the moment, where they've been through that remediation, still waiting for an EWS 1 7, 8, 9 months after the project completed. Why? Seen it in lots of other buildings as well, where they thought they'd solved the problem, but they've still got other problems. So they still can't move on. And again, because it's such
I'm thinking of the cladding that's just been announced to be very dangerous, that was considered to be safe. Is it EPS? Have I got that right?
Yeah, so that's a render on top of flammable insulation board, effectively, that's then stuck onto the wall. So to the untrained eye, it would look like a masonry wall that's been rendered. It looks very solid, but actually if you tap it, it sounds hollow. And it's very common system for putting on walls, because it looks nice and it lasts a long time, and it's cheap, and it has good insulation performance. So there's a lot of that around.
Absolutely, and it's very green, isn't it, apparently? It's been approved. So people will be having that on their buildings, and only now is it found to be not safe. So these are the sorts of things that are going to come in the second and the third wave, when something changes or it's been reviewed. And we just don't know what's going to happen, really, do we?
So I think that the key thing to understand with all of these different 3-letter acronyms and products is that the vast majority of them are plastic based. You know, they contain a lot of plastic, and that burns. So okay, they try and fire retard them, but ultimately you're putting a flammable material into a wall. Where you get your likes of your rock wool, which just won't burn. It's a mineral wool. It just doesn't burn, but it takes up more volume. So what we wanted, what the market wanted, was lower volume, high thermal efficiency products to insulate walls, plastic's very good at doing that. It's just not very
Yes.
good when you set light to it, and all sorts of fumes come out. So we've allowed this stuff to go onto buildings, and now we're saying, oh, because in Grenfell it performed like this, and that led to that outcome. We've now got to take this off, but it was on there for a reason. So okay,
Yes.
some of the manufacturers may have, or did probably, over-egg their credentials, manipulate the guidance, whatever you like. But ultimately, we knew this was a plastic-based insulation that would burn, and we, as the government and the regulatory system, allowed that to go onto buildings, and still allows it to go onto buildings.
Absolutely, yes.
So you kind of, I can't see any way other than we're responsible for this. And I think if you look at they've just now started a toxicology report, so looking at, when you burn this stuff, what are the fumes that are given off? Where do those fumes go? If they're getting into the building, what do they do to people? Those sorts of things, which again, if something doesn't burn, if you've got a brick wall, brick doesn't burn.
Yes.
So it's not a part of the fire, if you like. It resists fire. But that's very difficult to build at height with brick because of its weight. So we end up with these lightweight sort of curtain wall systems, which means we can go high,
yes.
we can build quickly, lightweight, thermally efficient, looks nice. So what we've done is actually charged ahead with the green agenda, which I think is good, and said buildings have got to perform well, but fire hasn't kept up, and still to this day there's inadequate research into fire in this country and globally, and it's something that we've just really overlooked, I think. So
yeah, I can agree with that.
I think a lot of people, these design solutions are theoretical designs of what might happen, and then you get a Grenfell where you actually do it for real and you torch the thing, and then you see what actually happens in relation to the design. So it's just a really sad situation, and it's one that we've got to find a way of living with for the foreseeable future, I think. And
yeah, there is no quick fix, absolutely.
No.
Much as I'd love there to be, there isn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think my view is we need to get much better at getting people out. Detection, suppression, evacuation, those things. And yes, going forward, and start with the most dangerous buildings that, even if you were to add those things in, are still too dangerous. Start there and work down, but do it in such a way that people can trade in and out. There's still a market because people still need somewhere to live. We've got a house.
Absolutely. Yes.
So
yeah, we do. Yes. My worry, though, is that I'm not sure that the government does have a list of which are the most dangerous buildings. I know they'll have information come through now from the safety fund, the application to that. But I don't think they've actually done any work to get this list and to identify all the really dangerous buildings. So I agree with you, it needs doing, but I'm not sure we've even got the basic information yet to do it.
They'll have. So the first thing is, with the safety fund, it's only for buildings over 18 metres anyway. So there's the vast majority of buildings are lower than that height.
Yes.
Probably in the order of, there's approximately 13,000 buildings over 18 metres. And then we think about 80 to 100,000, sort of 11 to 18 metres, that are excluded from the fund.
Yes.
So yes, they will have some information about the taller buildings. I haven't seen any evidence yet that the application process has any overt kind of risk assessment matrix to it. I think it's far more about who gets the paperwork through first. So which buildings submit a proceedable bid first, not which ones need the most, if you see what I mean, in terms of help or risk. Certainly not nationally. There isn't any kind of national risk assessment that says, okay, there are 50,000 dangerous buildings, if you like, or 50,000 or 100,000 buildings that we're looking at, and we've ranked them from the most risky to the least risky, 100,000 lines, everyone's got their own score, and we can now say, show me the top 10 most risky buildings in the country. That certainly hasn't been done, and
no,
I think is what not I think is what we need. I know is what we need, and we've been calling for years to say we've got to understand the scale of the problem. So if for example your building was, let's say we said we can all agree 65 out of 100 is a tolerable level of risk for a building, and your building scores 68. So there could be quite a small amount that needs to be done to bring it to 65 or below. Whereas if another building is 99 out of 100 or 100 out of 100, it may well be you could never make that building 65. The only thing you can do is demolish it. It's a condemned building that needs to be rebuilt. It's just too dangerous. And we've seen that with a few buildings that, one in West London, for example, recently that was force evacuated. And the story is that probably that's a demolition job. There's too much to do to make that building habitable. So we're going to have a range, and I think residents need to know where they are on that scale.
It would be so reassuring, wouldn't it, to have that information?
If you've got a lower number, yeah. But at least even if you've got a high risk score, you can
move out.
And you know what contributes to it. So you know that where you are, and you sort of say, okay, if we were to add a fire suppression system, that's going to take us from 75 to 64. And that makes it tolerable, so that's good. And maybe that 65 score or whatever the number is, that's where the normal lending, insuring, house sale market kicks in. Anything above, until that work's done, there's a bit of an impediment to it. But we can start to relate structures to that scoring mechanism. And if it's a score that we all agree with, or we've agreed and said, like, everyone buys into that scoring, we can then go and score all of those buildings quite quickly. And that's the kind of risk management activity I think that we need. Government have consistently refused to entertain for whatever reason. And from the interactions I've had with Ministry of Housing and with ministers and other experts, I'm just not sure they've got the technical capability to think this through, come up with a plan. I don't think there's some kind of plot there that's sinister to undermine everybody and harm everyone. I think it's just generally I think they're rabbits in the headlights.
I think you're right.
Refuse to accept help. That's the problem.
Yes, it is. They've had lots of help, lots of offers of help, and for some bizarre reason, every time they're turning it down. And that's a big mystery to me. If somebody can help, you hold your hands out and you say, thank you, thank goodness. But no, they're putting barriers up. It's all very bizarre.
So every building that we're talking about here, let's say it's 100,000 buildings, every single one of those already has a risk assessment in place. Back to your point, they all have a fire risk assessment, or should do. And although the fire risk assessment may not be perfect, it may not be sufficient, it's a starting point to start benchmarking each of these buildings. And the government have always had, through the regulatory reform fire safety order, have always had the legal power before Grenfell and now, without changing any legislation, to ask all building owners or compel all building owners to submit that fire risk assessment to them for analysis. So every single part of what we're talking about already exists in law and has existed since 2005. So all that has been lacked, or all that's lacking, is the willingness of the fire services and the government to formally request this information from building owners. And they already do it on an ad hoc basis, where they do desktop reviews of fire risk assessments for care homes and things like that. But it's the odd one. It's not a systemic, we need all of them by this date, and we're going to analyse them, and we're going to go back to you and say, based on what you've submitted for building X, we have significant concerns or questions in these areas, please answer them, and enter into a dialogue that says, right, at least now we understand where these buildings are, what their potential issues are, and what we need to do next to make them safe. Is all, I don't like to use the term easy, but eminently possible and feasible. with the existing law that have had for years. But political will has not been there to do it.
Which takes me back to what I just said. It's bizarre. And I really don't understand why there's no political will to do it.
Yeah.
It would seem an easy solution.
Yeah, just imagine the situation that if you said, we've identified that cars are starting to crash because of a certain deficiency, and knowing whether each car has got that deficiency, that will be in their MOT certificate, because we'd gather that for everyone that goes to an MOT, that's noted down, but we can't be bothered to bring all those MOT certificates in and have a look at them and see who else has got that problem. I mean, but back to the word absurd, you're right. I look at it every time and think, well, is it so abundantly, what am I missing? And everybody I've spoken to, that whether it's in the fire service, say, yeah, we could do that, but we haven't been told to do it. The government did say to me, a guy called Neil O'Connor, who's one of the senior MHCLG people, I asked him in an industry event in the middle of 2019, I asked him that direct question in a Q&A session, and he said to me that, well, the reason we're not doing it is we don't have the legal power to do it, which is wrong. But also, if that were to be the case, we've got the fire safety bill going through and we've got the building safety bill going through, and it hasn't made it into that legislation either. So the Register of Fire Risk Assessments is an amendment that may or may not get voted through when the fire safety bill goes back to the House of Commons. So it may become law that you do have to register fire risk assessments, but there is nothing in there to say that we're going to analyse them, we're going to score them, we're going to interact with people on them, we're going to routinely look at them. It's just that they're going to be on a register now, so you have a legal right to see the fire risk assessment for your building, which you don't at the moment. So it really does lack imagination, I think, in terms of how do you solve a problem as big as this quickly. And bear in mind now we're talking about this 3.5 plus years after Grenfell. We're not talking about it immediate months after Grenfell. We're talking years of inactivity and lost time, lost opportunity. So yeah, it's frustrating. Professionally, unbelievably frustrating from a impacted leaseholder's perspective, I think, and
it is so much. And I go back to what I said before, it's this 3.5 years, almost 4 years, when nothing's been done, but we're told to be patient. I just want to leap out of my chair and say, no, you've got it wrong. You shouldn't be asking us to be patient. That tone as well, you know, that I referred to of in due course. No, it's been 3.5 years. In due course passed a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I think that the government talk about the sort of the largest review of legislation or update of legislation in 40 years and all that sort of stuff. But actually, as currently drafted, that new legislation will not actually make a material difference to safety across the whole piece. It might help in certain areas, hinder in others. But it isn't a Grenfell happened, this is terrible. We got 200 people in an office somewhere, and they've just been working on a tactical response to making buildings safe in their, you know, in different areas of the country, but actually working through and making, and you know, we were at 20 out of 100 across the national building stock immediately after Grenfell, or a year after Grenfell when we measured it all, and now the safety index is 45 on average 2 years after that, and we're working towards 50 on average by the end of next year. Where are those milestones in terms of saying, you know, an objective measure of how safe buildings are isn't there? It's sort of, we think magically if we set up a new regulator with very little working capital in a year or so, and then they slowly add buildings into their regulatory regime over 7 years, which even if they've done that is only 13,000 out of hundreds of thousands, we're kidding ourselves to think we're suddenly going to have a far safer building stock than we've got at the moment. And that
Absolutely.
none of that really helps you, does it, or your neighbours?
Not at all. Not at all.
But maybe in 15 years it could be wonderful. But what do we do, bearing in mind then we're 20 years post Grenfell?
Yes.
What impact has that had? You know, that's the big sort of elephant in the room that isn't being discussed in all of this debate, because quite rightly at the moment everybody's focused on how do we get cladding off and who pays for it. Who's going to pay the bill?
I do actually feel that the government are being disingenuous with us as well, because I agree with everything you're saying. When, say, Stephen Greenhouse talks about ACM cladding, or Robert Jenrick talks about ACM cladding, and that 78% or whatever the figure is that they agree has been remediated. I feel like they're twisting the truth. They're trying to hide something, because you and I know that ACM is that much of the problem. And so if you've remediated that much of that much, but they're talking about it as if there's this massive success. And to me, if you're doing that, you're not really working on the problem. You're hiding the problem. And it just doesn't feel as if they're taking it seriously and making the efforts they should be.
I think I think you're right, and I think there's a one of the miscalculations they've made is how well informed the impacted victims of this scandal are. You know, the fact that, you know, sort of one of the things I have on my desk here is the a copy of EWS1,
okay,
including all of my markings and questions and all that sort of thing that I constantly refer to. And I think a lot of people that I've met through all of this that aren't technical people, they're residents, they have real lives and day jobs outside of construction and property management, know every word of that document. They know all the advice notes, they know where the problems are, they know where the conflicts are. And so when over the weekend somebody from the property industry came out and started talking about EWS1, and immediately residents were just jumping in and saying, no, you've got that technical point wrong, look at note 2. So where you've got a point where, and this probably applies to the government, where I think a lot of the people that are involved in this debate outside of the government know more about the problem than the Ministry of Housing do. They're always trying to chase and catch up with the story. They probably didn't think through the impact of the gagging clause, for example, in the safety fund application. Their numbers don't add up quite often. Their guidance conflicts. And you'll spot this within minutes of any announcement being made. You start spotting the flaws, and you know, one of the ones over the last few days was the announcement around dropping buildings out of the scope of EWS1.
Absolutely.
Hurrah! And then I said, well, fire safety bill puts exactly the same requirement back in, but for even more buildings, because they now have to specifically include the external wall. And that fire safety bill is due to go through the Parliament in January, if it's on time. So all of a sudden, you give with one hand and take away with the other. And ultimately, the reason it's in the fire safety bill is because it's important and it's material to whether a building's safe or not. It's not just playing around with the goalposts to suit lenders. So there is so little joined up thinking that I think probably the government spokespeople have got confused by their own web of misinformation, if you like, or absurdity, that they don't know now what the technical facts are and what the relationships are between different bits of guidance and regulation and law. They maybe genuinely don't know. Maybe that's why they're tripping themselves up at every turn. I don't know. I'm confused.
It could well be. I was reading a tweet today, and I can't remember the guy's name, but some Conservative MP had replied to a leaseholder who'd said, can you please vote for the amendment that's coming through for the fire safety bill? And the response was really quite terse, and it just said, I've spoken to my minister about this, and my minister said it's not the right thing to do. And I'm paraphrasing, but it was sort of that brief and that blunt. This guy must have no idea. Just to say, I've taken the word of my minister. I've not looked for myself. I've not spoken to anybody for myself. I've just taken the one word of this person and I'm not going to vote for it. And I think that taps into what you're saying. Either they have no time to look at things, they have no inclination. I'm not sure what the issue is. But I was horrified to read that.
Yeah, that was Bob Stewart MP, wasn't it? That was a reply from Bob Stewart.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Who, unfortunately, I couldn't put on Twitter because I don't think he's on Twitter. But if somebody knows him and they can put a copy of this video through to him, maybe he'll learn something. And there is an open and enduring offer to all MPs of all colours that our DMs are open if ever they want a technical chat about the legislation, about how all this came about, a different view. It's all there. Quite a lot of them do. They do get in contact and say, look, I'm thinking about this, or putting an amendment in our local council. Can you, what do you think? More than happy always to take those calls, take those messages. And again, I don't mind what political party they're from.
Yes.
If they want to learn more about the subject and they want to help do the right thing, the door's always open. Even if they want an argument to say you're wrong because the reason we should charge leaseholders is X, Y, and Z. Let's have that debate. Let's understand what they're thinking.
Yes.
But to dismiss the problem is
it's a bit outrageous.
Yeah, people's lives are at stake here, and livelihoods, and their job is to take this seriously and do the right thing. They're elected to be our betters, supposedly, and they need to step up to them and fulfil that responsibility.
Yes.
Fantastic. All right. Well, Juliet, thank you very much indeed for joining us, and hope
You're welcome.
Australia treats you well, and when you come back, everything will be sorted.
Oh, lovely. Wouldn't it be nice? Let's hope there's no lockdown either.
Absolutely. Take care. Thank you very much.
And you. Bye-bye.